Have you ever been in a situation where, resources were just incredibly tight, the challenges felt huge, almost impossible, but deep down you had this feeling there had to be a clever way through, maybe not the obvious way.
Yeah, like finding a workaround when the main road's blocked.
Exactly. Or maybe you're just always trying to get more done with less, looking for those smart solutions, when the usual methods just don't cut it.
If that sounds familiar to you, well, you're definitely in the right place today.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Today we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating idea, frugal innovation.
Right. And let's be clear, this isn't just about, pinching pennies or doing things on the cheap.
Not at all. It's really about a different way of thinking. Strategically, sustainably doing more with less, and the impact can be, well, pretty incredible.
Precisely. And our sources for this deep dive, they come from a really close look at how entrepreneurs operate in Morocco. It gives us this vivid picture of entrepreneurs navigating really complex situations. They're blending formal business setups with, let's say, informal ingenuity.
And using digital tools too, right? That seems key.
Absolutely key. Using digital tools to build businesses that are tough, resilient, and can actually scale up even when things are tough.
Right. So our mission here for you is to pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the real insights from all this material.
We really want to understand how those constraints, the things that look like roadblocks, how they can actually become sparks for innovation, catalysts, really.
Turning limitations into advantages. I like that.
And honestly, get ready for maybe some aha moments today. We're going to dig into what frugal innovation really is.
Let's see it in action, right?
Yeah.
With these case studies from Morocco.
Exactly. Real-world examples. And then we'll pull out the lessons. Lessons for everyone, really.
Whether you're building a business yourself, maybe shaping policy, or even if you're just curious about how people manage to thrive when things are uncertain.
There's something here for you.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Let's start by really dissecting this more with less idea. The foundations of frugal innovation.
Where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Frugal innovation at its heart is about creating high-impact solutions using, well, minimal resources.
So think affordability, sustainability, adaptability.
Exactly. Those are the pillars. Affordability as a feature, not a bug. Sustainability built in. And incredible adaptability. It's cleverness over just throwing money at a problem.
That makes sense. And it's not just a trend, is it? You mentioned it's vital.
Oh, absolutely vital, especially in places where resources are genuinely scarce, where the traditional, capital-heavy ways just won't work or aren't even an option.
Right.
It's this process of doing more with less, focusing on practical solutions, things that are cost-effective and, crucially, meet real local needs, often urgent needs.
So the perfect solution might be the one that just works with what you have right now.
Precisely. Not the overly complex, expensive one.
Okay. And something else, our sources highlight this is pretty fascinating, is that frugal innovation often pops up or even thrives right at the intersection of formal rules and informal ways of doing things.
That's a critical point. You've got formal business regulations on one side.
The official stuff, the paperwork.
Yeah. And then you've got these informal support systems on the other. Community ties, trust networks.
Like operating in two worlds at once.
Exactly. Many entrepreneurs, like the ones we're seeing in Morocco, are constantly moving between these structured rules and these much more flexible community-driven networks.
It's like a handshake deal might be as important as a signed contract sometimes.
In many cases, yes. Which raises a really important question for us. How do these entrepreneurs actually use these informal networks? Things like, social capital, trust built over years, simple word of mouth. How do they use that to scale their businesses?
Especially when the formal routes, banks, VCs, strict regulations are hard to access or just too slow.
Right. It's a kind of ingenuity, finding pathways where none seem to exist. For many, these informal networks aren't just a backup plan.
They're the main engine.
Often, yes, the primary engine for growth, particularly early on.
Wow. It makes you think about the rules we assume everyone follows. And speaking of changing the rules, let's talk digital. You said that's key.
Oh, absolutely. Digital tech has completely changed the game for frugal innovation.
How so?
Well, think about it. Suddenly you have access to markets that were geographically impossible to reach before.
Right, you can sell online anywhere.
Exactly. And new ways to get funding, maybe crowdfunding or micropayments. Plus, collaborative tools, you don't need a big office anymore.
It's like getting superpowers on a budget.
That's a great way to put it. It is like a superpower, a real accelerator. Digital integration isn't just, a nice extra. It's fundamental.
It enables scale that was unthinkable before.
Completely unthinkable. For resource-constrained businesses, it allows a level of reach. I mean, imagine just a decade or two ago. Impossible.
Online platforms, mobile money.
Mobile payments are huge, especially where traditional banking is limited. Digital communication. It all cuts overheads massively and just broadens your reach like crazy.
A small shop in Morocco could technically reach customers globally.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Or find collaborators, suppliers. The possibilities just explode.
Okay, so we have the mindset, the formal-informal dance, the digital boost, but there's another layer, right? Something called sense-making.
Yes, sense-making. Our sources draw heavily on Carl Weick's work here. It's a really powerful concept for understanding these entrepreneurs.
So what is sense-making in simple terms?
At its core, it's about how we, as individuals or organizations, make sense of confusing, ambiguous situations. It's not about having all the answers laid out.
It's about figuring things out as you go.
Exactly. It's about constructing meaning, creating understanding and direction when things are uncertain or changing fast, which is pretty much the default state for these entrepreneurs.
Okay. So for frugal innovators who are always dealing with shifting markets, limited resources, unexpected problems.
Sense-making is vital. They have to constantly interpret what's happening and adapt. They don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect information.
The study shows the Moroccan entrepreneurs are brilliant at this.
They really are. They take these constraints, these limitations that look like dead ends.
And turn them into opportunities.
Precisely. But it's not passive. It's very action-oriented. You try something, you see what happens, you learn, you adjust, you try again.
Doing, then learning, then doing again.
Right. It builds adaptability, resilience, right into how they evolve their business models. They're not waiting for clarity. They're creating it through their actions.
Forging the path as they walk it. Love that. Okay, so we've got the theory down, frugal innovation, sense-making. Now let's see it in practice.
Let's dive into the case studies. We look at 3 really distinct examples from Morocco. Each one gives us unique insights into how this stuff actually works on the ground.
These aren't just abstract ideas. They're real stories.
Real journeys of resilience, creativity, sheer determination sometimes.
Let's start with the first one, Madness. What do?
Okay, Madness. They're a social innovation incubator. So their main goal isn't just profit. It's about empowering Moroccan entrepreneurs, specifically those focused on creative projects and social impact.
Building an ecosystem almost.
Exactly, building the fabric of that ecosystem from the grassroots up.
And their frugal approach. How does that work for an incubator?
It's really clever. They use a hybrid model. They blend nonprofit funding, grants, donations, that kind of thing.
Okay.
With revenue they generate themselves from entrepreneurial activities. This mix gives them stability, but also flexibility. They aren't just chasing grant cycles.
Interesting. But you mentioned networks earlier. How does that play in?
That's the truly compelling part. They rely massively on informal networks
Yeah.
for almost everything.
Like what?
Peer-to-peer mentorship between the entrepreneurs they support. Finding initial seed funding, often small amounts from community members, not big VCs. Even just operational flexibility, like borrowing space or equipment.
So they're leveraging social capital.
Hugely. It shows that social capital isn't just a nice to have. It's a real, tangible, strategic asset for them. They've almost, you could say, monetized trust.
Wow. So what's the big takeaway from Madness?
Madness really shows us the power of this grassroots innovation, how deep community engagement fosters real social sustainability. It's not just about the financial bottom line.
It's about building something lasting in the community.
Precisely. In a world often obsessed with unicorns and hypergrowth, Madness proves that value creation goes way beyond spreadsheets. It's about cultivating a whole ecosystem, a thriving forest, not just a few giant trees.
A web of support, not just a ladder to funding. I like that image.
Okay.
Okay, case study 2, NexTronix. A different story, Robbie. More about crisis.
Very different, yes. NexTronix started out as a tech manufacturer, but their story's really defined by having to make these dramatic pivots when faced with major adversity.
Tell us about that. What happened?
Well, the big test came with the COVID-19 pandemic. Morocco faced critical shortages of medical gear.
Ventilators, masks.
Exactly. And NexTronix, instead of just, shutting down or waiting for help,
They pivoted.
dramatically.
Yeah.
They rapidly shifted their entire production line to make ventilators and masks. This wasn't some long-planned strategic move.
It was pure necessity, response to a national crisis.
Absolutely. Necessity-driven transformation. And they did it frugally. They used low-cost, rapid prototyping methods,
Meaning?
iterative design, quick testing, using readily available materials and tools. They could adapt super quickly to the urgent need without needing huge upfront investment.
A lean, agile response.
Exactly. And crucially, after the immediate crisis subsided, they didn't just snap back to their old business.
They learned from it.
Profoundly.
Yeah.
They internalized those lessons about agility and resilience. They fundamentally changed their business model to focus on sustainable, resilient manufacturing practices. Adaptability became part of their DNA.
Not just an emergency measure.
Right. It wasn't just about surviving the crisis. It was about evolving through it.
So the bigger picture lesson from NexTronix.
It powerfully underscores how vital agility is, and also collaboration within the ecosystem, especially in unstable economies or during global shocks like the pandemic.
The sources mentioned the earthquake too, right?
Yes, the Al Haouz earthquake. Their response there further showed how they've embedded this capacity for rapid adaptation. They leveraged the crisis to fundamentally re-architect their approach, building in resilience.
Incredible. Turning disaster into a catalyst for fundamental change.
Yeah.
Okay, third case study. Aboulfeth Hamza, a digital entrepreneur.
Yes, and his journey is almost a textbook example of moving from the purely informal digital world to building a scalable, sustainable tech business, all through resourcefulness.
How did he start?
Amazingly young, just 14 years old. He started selling shell accounts, basically, informal access to server space.
Wow.
And teaching himself web hosting, all completely informal. No company registration, no outside funding, just pure hustle and learning online.
A self-taught tech kid.
Pretty much. Selling to friends, local businesses, learning as he went.
So how did he go from that to a formal business? What was the trigger?
This is where it gets really interesting, tying back to constraints. As demand grew, the limitations of being informal started to bite.
Like what kind of limitations?
Things like not being able to process larger payments professionally, needing formal banking to grow or deal with bigger clients.
Ah, so the constraints forced him to formalize.
Exactly. It wasn't a strategic choice made in a boardroom. It was a necessity-driven innovation. The roadblock literally showed him the next step on the path.
That flips the usual script on business growth, doesn't it? Where formalization is seen as this planned, proactive step.
Completely. Here, it was a reaction and adaptation forced by the environment.
And the sources use some advanced analysis on his interviews. Computational linguistics.
Yes, which gives us these really deep insights, patterns you wouldn't normally see.
Okay, tell us about that. What do they find? Like word frequency.
Right, word frequency mapping. Basically counting words, the terms he used most. Servers, hosting, scaling, innovation, and significantly, learning.
What does that tell you?
It screams that his growth wasn't luck. It was driven by constant self-learning, getting deeply technical, and a relentless focus on scaling and improving, an internal drive.
Okay. What else? Named entity recognition. NER.
NER identifies key things like names, places, organizations. In Hamza's case, it showed tons of interactions with clients and informal partners early on.
Reinforcing the network idea.
Exactly. And it confirmed that his move to formalize wasn't some internal grand strategy. It was pushed by external things. Banks needing paperwork, bigger clients needing formal invoices.
Constraints again. Fascinating. What about sentiment analysis? Tracking his emotions.
Sentiment trajectory evaluation, yeah. They mapped the ups and downs. Optimism peaked when he talked about scaling, innovation. Makes sense.
But dips when discussing regulations, finances.
Exactly. But the key thing, even with those drops, his ability to interpret those challenges, those feelings of frustration maybe, and then pivot his strategy, that's pure sense-making.
He used the negative signals to adapt, not give up.
Precisely. He didn't let the uncertainty paralyze him.
In the last analysis, PCA.
PCA-based business model analysis. Principal component analysis helps find patterns in complex data. It clearly showed distinct phases in his business.
Right.
An early informal learning phase. Then a growth phase focused on getting clients and that forced formalization. And finally, a diversification phase moving into new industries.
It maps his evolution, driven by opportunities and constraints.
Perfectly. It validates this iterative adaptation process.
So zooming in on Hamza and Frugal innovation specifically.
That's a masterclass. Resourcefulness. He started with zero capital, self-financed everything by reinvesting earnings, pure bootstrapping. Grit, making every dirham work hard.
And his tech skills were his lever.
Absolutely. His deep knowledge of servers, hosting, cybersecurity. That allowed him to optimize costs incredibly well while scaling complex stuff. Technology was his advantage, built through self-learning, not bought with investment.
He was his own lean machine.
In effect, yes.
Yeah.
And crisis adaptation, COVID, economic shifts, they didn't stop him.
He diversified into agriculture and hospitality. Seems different.
It forced him to diversify strategically. He looked for new areas where maybe his core digital skills could still apply, or just where opportunities existed in a changing landscape. Incredible agility.
So connecting this back to sense-making, his journey wasn't a straight line based on a plan.
Not at all. It was constant interpretation, reinterpretation, constraints, opportunities. His business grew organically. Learning, experimenting, building on informal relationships before needing formal ones, dynamically adapting to legal, financial, tech hurdles.
A real-time dialogue with his environment.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
These stories, they're really powerful, more than just business examples. They're about human resilience, ingenuity.
Definitely. Which brings us to the big picture. What are the key findings, the big lessons from Morocco here?
One thing that just jumps out is the need for flexible, hybrid business models. It came up in all the cases.
Absolutely. That's a consistent theme. The power comes from combining that structured formal side with the agility and responsiveness you get from informal networks.
Getting the best of both worlds.
Exactly. It creates this structure that's both robust and incredibly adaptable. It can bend without breaking, pivot when needed.
And then there's resource use and digital tools. Both seem critical.
Huge enablers. Madness showed how community engagement builds social capital, shares resources organically.
NexTronix showed digital adaptability in a crisis using lean methods to pivot fast.
And Hamza showed how digital know-how can democratize entrepreneurship, letting you build something complex with little capital. It levels the playing field.
All of which ties back to sense-making, right, as the driver.
It seems to be the underlying engine. How do entrepreneurs facing such deep uncertainty, lack of info, unpredictable future, how do they still find a way forward?
They construct meaning from the mess.
Exactly. They don't just react. They improvise, they adapt, they turn impossible situations into innovative solutions. They invent new realities.
It's not just about getting through challenges, but transforming them.
Well put. Of course, we have to be realistic. It's not easy.
No. The sources mentioned real challenges. Regulatory hurdles, lack of access to formal finance, tough competition.
These are significant barriers, real obstacles.
And also opportunities.
Exactly. Those challenges also point towards where smart interventions could help. Better policies, more accessible digital tools, fostering collaboration to pool resources and knowledge.
Turning weaknesses into strengths.
That's the potential.
Okay, so let's bring this home for everyone listening. What are the actionable insights? What can you take away from this deep dive?
Right. For entrepreneurs listening, maybe you're starting out, maybe you're scaling. 3 key things jump out.
Okay, first,
Leverage networks, formalize smartly. Don't underestimate your informal connections. Mentors, support, agility, they're gold early on.
but don't stay informal forever.
Right. Plan strategically for gradual formalization when it becomes necessary to get bank loans, bigger clients, key partnerships. Find that sweet spot between flexible and structured.
Got it. Second insight for entrepreneurs.
Second, embrace digital transformation. Seriously. See digital tools not just as costs, but as your essential levers for scaling, cutting costs, reaching markets.
Even with limited money.
Especially with limited money. They're your force multipliers. They democratize so much.
And third,
Third, and it may be the most important, master sense-making. Get good at reading the ambiguity. See constraints not as dead ends, but as, like, design challenges, creative puzzles.
learn to pivot, like Hamza and NexTronix.
Exactly. Practice adapting, experimenting, learning constantly from what works and what doesn't. Make meaning actively.
Great advice. Now, what about policymakers? People in positions to shape the environment.
They have a huge role to play. First, design hybrid regulatory frameworks. Create policies that actually support the way formal and informal systems interact. Don't just try to force everything into the formal box.
Acknowledge the reality on the ground. Empower the informal sector, too.
Yes. Create smoother pathways between them. Second, incentivize frugal innovation. Target support towards high-impact, resource-efficient businesses. Recognize that more with less is a powerful engine for sustainable growth.
Good point. And third, for policymakers.
Support adaptive training. Fund programs that teach entrepreneurs these skills. Adaptive decision-making, critical thinking, sense-making. Give them the mental toolkit to navigate uncertainty.
Build resilience through skills. Makes sense. Lastly, what about researchers, practitioners globally?
Lots to dig into. First, expand your view. Frugal innovation isn't just for emerging markets. These principles are relevant everywhere, especially now. Explore how they apply in developed economies, too.
Good point. Constraints exist everywhere in different forms.
Second, look to the future tech. How can AI, machine learning, Industry 4.0 push frugal models even further, take more with less to a whole new level?
Interesting intersection. And third,
Deepen the links. Keep exploring the connections between sense-making and innovation, especially under constraint. How does the human mind really navigate and create when resources are tight and the path isn't clear? How do we really build that bridge with no blueprint?
so much to think about. We've really covered a lot today.
We have. From the concept of frugal innovation itself, this idea of reimagining business models when resources are tight.
To seeing it live in Morocco. Madness, using community power.
NexTronix pivoting through crisis with tech.
And Hamza scaling digitally through pure resourcefulness and learning.
Yeah, the Moroccan landscape gives us such rich, practical insights.
These stories, they're really about resilience, aren't they? Ingenuity, adaptation.
Absolutely. How flexibility, using what's local, embracing digital, how it leads to sustainable growth and real social impact. It can reshape economies from the ground up.
So, as we wrap up, here's something for you to chew on. Final thought. How might these ideas, doing more with less, seeing constraints as opportunities, how might they apply in your world, your work, your life, challenges in your community?
That's the question, isn't it?
How could a frugal innovation mindset unlock solutions you haven't even thought of yet? Where might necessity spark not just invention, but maybe even a little revolution in how you tackle things?
Just keeping an eye out for those moments.